His name appears in the Bible 3 times. He never speaks a single recorded word. He performs no miracle. He is never called a prophet, a priest, or a leader. And yet, on one afternoon in the wilderness, he did something that required a kind of strength most people never think about, because it was not the kind of strength anyone could see from the valley below. He stood on a hill. He held up another man's arms, and he did not let go until the sun went down. His name was HUR. And if you have spent years reading the Bible without stopping to look at him, today we are going to change that. Because in his silence, in his steadiness, in the quiet hours he spent holding up the prophet of God, when the prophet's body could no longer do it alone, there is a lesson that goes straight to the center of what it means to serve God and to serve other people. Not every person who participates in what God does stands at the front. Not every person who matters to the story gets a chapter named after them. Some people stand on a hillside with their hands on someone else's arms, watching a battle they cannot fight directly, trusting that what they are doing is exactly where God needs them to be. HUR was one of those people. And his story, brief as it is in the text, is worth every minute of our attention. The wilderness of Rephidim was not a place Israel had chosen. It was where the journey had brought them. They had crossed the Red Sea not long before, and the memory of Egypt was still fresh, still tangled with all the things that slavery does to a people over 400 years. They were learning, slowly and imperfectly, what it meant to live as people who belonged to God. And now, without invitation or warning, a battle had come to them. The Amalekites were a nomadic people descended from Esau, who controlled significant portions of the Sinai region. What made their attack particularly striking is recorded in Deuteronomy 25:17-18. They did not meet Israel face to face in open battle. They struck from the rear, targeting those who were trailing behind the column, the weakest among them, those who were already exhausted and unable to defend themselves. This was not combat between armies. It was a predatory attack on the most vulnerable. It is also worth noting, as a detail the text makes clear, that this was Israel's very first battle as a free people. They had not been trained for war. They had been slaves. And now the first military test of their existence as a nation had arrived. God allowed this moment not to prove how capable Israel was, but to reveal something about how he fights for his people. Every element of what followed was designed to make that visible. Moses responded without hesitation. He called on Joshua to select capable men and take the field. And he himself, with Aaron and HUR, went to the top of the hill. In his hand was the staff of God, the same staff that divided the sea and brought water from the rock in the wilderness. It was going up with him because what was about to happen on that hill was not a military maneuver. It was an act of faith. Before we follow them up the hill, it is worth pausing to ask a question the Bible does not fully answer. Who was HUR? The text of Exodus 17 offers no introduction. HUR simply appears, already present, already trusted, walking up the hill beside Moses, as if this were perfectly natural. That tells us something significant on its own. He was not a stranger summoned at the last moment. He was someone Moses already knew and already relied upon. His name appears twice more in Exodus. In chapter 24, verse 14, when Moses prepares to ascend Sinai to receive the law of God and will be absent for 40 days, he instructs the people, "Aaron and HUR are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them." Moses did not place a committee in charge of the nation. He placed 2 men. One was his own brother. The other was HUR. Then in 1 Chronicles 2:18-20, the genealogy records that HUR was the father of Uri, and Uri was the father of Bezalel. That name matters enormously. In Exodus 31, 2-5, God speaks to Moses and says, "I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of HUR, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship." Bezalel was the man God appointed to design and build the tabernacle, the dwelling place of the Most High among his people. The man holding Moses' arms on the hill was the grandfather of the craftsman who would build the house of God. HUR was a trustworthy man, a man of character, and a man who was present when it mattered most. Now let us go up the hill with them. Exodus 17:10 records simply that Joshua went down to the valley to fight, and Moses went up to the hilltop with Aaron and HUR. There was no elaborate briefing, no assigned roles announced in advance. Moses raised the staff of God toward heaven, and what happened next was visible to everyone who could see both the ridge and the valley at the same time. Verse 11 in the book of Exodus is striking. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. And whenever he let his hand fall, Amalek prevailed. The momentum of the battle below shifted with the position of the prophet's hands above. Not because those hands held power in themselves, but because their lifting was a posture of need, of trust in God, and of faith in His power revealed in that battle. In the Hebrew tradition, lifted hands were not performance. They were prayer made visible. They were the body expressing what the heart was declaring. I am not sufficient for this. I am calling on the one who is. Every moment those hands rose, Israel was fighting under the banner of God. Every moment they dropped, that visible declaration of dependence ceased, and the battle reflected it. This is a picture, not a formula. God was not mechanically responding to the angle of Moses' arms. He was doing something far deeper. He was teaching an entire nation, through what their eyes could see, that the outcome of their battles was not in their own hands. The raised staff was the grammar of that lesson, written across the sky above the valley. And then the Bible gives us a detail that most readers pass over far too quickly. Verse 12 begins with 3 words. Moses' hands grew heavy. He was a man, an 80-year-old man, standing in the Sinai heat, arms raised, holding a staff, knowing that somewhere in the valley below, men were living or dying in connection to what he was doing, and his body was telling him it could not continue. The Bible tells us Moses was 80 years old at the time of the Exodus. 40 years spent in Pharaoh's palace, 40 more in the wilderness of Midian. This was not a young man in the strength of his youth. And now, at the moment the battle demanded the most, his arms were failing him. Notice what the text does not say, that Moses found some reservoir of willpower and pushed through. What the text says is that 2 men who were standing right beside him looked at what they were seeing and did something about it. They had been there the entire time. They had climbed the hill together. They were already present. They were simply waiting, perhaps without fully realizing it, for the moment when their presence would become the very thing that made it possible to continue. Verse 12 gives us the complete picture. They took a stone and put it under Moses so that he could sit. Aaron supported one hand, HUR supported the other, and his hands remained steady until the sun went down. Before they held his arms, they found a stone. That detail is easy to skip, but it is worth noticing. Someone on that hillside looked at Moses and understood that he needed to stop standing, not stop interceding, not stop the work, just stop standing. And rather than criticizing him, rather than expressing frustration or alarm, they located a stone and placed it beneath him so that his body could rest without his position being abandoned. This was practical wisdom married to genuine love. they did not give Moses a speech about perseverance. They gave him something to sit on. And then they took up the weight he could no longer bear alone. Aaron on one side, HUR on the other, steady and unmoving for the remaining hours of the battle. We do not know exactly when Moses' arms began to fail, but the Bible tells us they held his hands from that point until the sun set. That is hours, not minutes. Hours of standing on a hillside in the heat, holding up another man's arms, watching a battle they could not participate in directly, performing an act that produced no visible result of their own. The sword belonged to Joshua. The staff belonged to Moses. Aaron and HUR brought only their hands and their endurance. And that was exactly what was needed. They were not fighting with weapons. They were fighting with faithfulness. And it was enough. And before we continue, if these stories from Scripture are meaningful to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more lives in the pages of the Bible that deserve this kind of attention, and your support helps us continue sharing their stories. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss what is coming next. Now, back to Rephidim. Verse 13 is brief and final. Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. The battle ended. Israel stood in the wilderness, alive and victorious, and Moses built an altar. He did not name it after Joshua, who had led the fighting. He did not name it after himself. He did not name it after Aaron or after HUR. He called it Yahweh Nisi. The Lord is my banner. A banner in ancient warfare was the point of reference in the middle of chaos. The thing you looked toward when the noise and the dust made it impossible to know where you stood. Moses was saying with that altar, the reference point was never any of us. The point we were all fighting toward was him. God commanded Moses to write this down and make sure Joshua heard it. This victory was not meant to become a private memory of a single day. It was to remain recorded, a reminder that the Lord fights for his people. And on that day, he worked through raised hands and through those who came to support. Rephidim was not the last time HUR appeared in the story of Israel. In Exodus 24:14, when Moses is preparing to ascend Sinai for 40 days to receive the law, he gives his final instructions before he goes. He does not create an elaborate system of governance or appoint a council. He names two people, Aaron and HUR. Anyone involved in a dispute can go to them. Consider the weight of that trust. Moses was about to step into one of the most extraordinary encounters in human history, an extended meeting with God at the summit of a mountain, with clouds and fire and the voice of the Almighty. He would be gone 40 days. The nation he left behind numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and the person he trusted alongside his own brother to hold that nation together was HUR. HUR's faithfulness on the hillside was not exceptional behavior. It was characteristic behavior. It was who he was. Moses had known him long enough to understand that when you needed someone to hold steady in your absence, when you needed someone who would be there when it was difficult and unrecognized and necessary, HUR was that person. His presence at the battle had not been an accident or a convenience. It was the natural expression of a man whose entire life was shaped by faithfulness to the people God had placed him among. The Bible does not record what HUR did during those 40 days while Moses was on Sinai. It does not describe the decisions he made, the disputes he resolved, or the challenges that arose. It simply records that he was there. In the same way, it recorded him on the hillside, steady, present, doing what was in front of him without needing a monument. There is one more thread in HUR's story. 1 Chronicles 2:18-20 records the genealogy. HUR fathered Uri, and Uri fathered Bezalel. And in Exodus 31:1-5, God speaks to Moses and says, "See, I have called by name Bezalel the son of Uri, son of HUR of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft." Bezalel built the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the lampstand, the altar of incense, the curtains of the holy place. All of it passed through his hands. Every sacred object that made it possible for the presence of God to dwell visibly among his people was crafted by the grandson of the man who had stood on the hillside and held up Moses' arms. Now let us sit with the deeper picture, because the story of Rephidim is not just history. It invites us to see something deeper at work beneath the surface. Moses needed to keep his hands raised. That was the visible form of dependence, the outward shape of faith expressed in a battle. But Moses was a human being, and human beings grow weary. The act of faith does not always sustain itself through sheer will, and there is no shame in that. It is simply the condition of being human before God. God could have held Moses' arms supernaturally. He is not constrained by an 80-year-old body. But he did not do that. He placed Aaron on one side and HUR on the other. He arranged for the sustaining of the act of faith to happen through community, through people who stood beside the one who was carrying it and absorbed what he could no longer hold alone. This was not a workaround or a second-best solution. It was the design. Elijah experienced something similar. After calling down fire at Carmel, he collapsed under a tree, exhausted and asking to die. And God's response was not a rebuke. An angel came with food and water and told him to eat because the journey was too great for him. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians that in his weakness, he learned what it meant to receive strength from outside himself. And in Gethsemane, Jesus asked his disciples to stay with him, to watch alongside him in the dark garden hours before the cross. He did not need them to protect him or advise him. He wanted company in the weight of what he was carrying. The pattern is consistent across all of it. God does not demand that his people carry things alone. He places people beside them. And sometimes the most important thing any of us can do is be the one who stands beside them, arms outstretched, ready. One more thing in this story that deserves notice. HUR did not wait to be asked. There is no verse in which Moses requests help. There is no recorded conversation in which HUR is assigned his role. Moses' hands dropped, the battle shifted, and HUR moved. He saw what was needed and closed the distance between seeing it and doing something about it, without waiting for a ceremony to authorize him. That kind of attentiveness is not common. Most of us wait for a clear invitation before we step in. HUR simply saw and acted. That is the nature of faithfulness when it has become a settled habit rather than an occasional decision. This brings us to the question that HUR's story places directly in front of each of us. And it is worth answering honestly. In the account of Rephidim, there are three distinct positions. Joshua is in the valley, sword drawn, fighting the battle that everyone can see, where the consequences are immediate and visible, and the story will remember what happens. Moses is on the hill, staff raised, carrying the posture of intercession, the public act of dependence that the whole battle turns on. And Aaron and HUR stand beside Moses, doing something no one in the valley can see, producing nothing that looks like victory in their own hands, simply standing in the background of the scene. Most people, if they are honest, want to be Joshua. The action in the valley is where recognition lives, where the sword meets the enemy and the outcome is clear. There is nothing wrong with that desire. Joshua was exactly where God placed him, and what he did was necessary. But not everyone is called to the valley. Some are called to the hill. Being HUR means standing beside someone whose arms are dropping. It might look like faithfully interceding for a pastor who is carrying burdens the congregation never sees. It might look like showing up for a friend who is struggling, not with answers or advice, but with steady, unhurried presence. It might look like serving in a capacity that no one records or recognizes week after week, because you know deep down that it matters, even when no one is watching and the evidence of its significance remains invisible to you. HUR did not deliver a prophecy, command an army, or perform a miracle. He stood on a hillside with another man's arm in his hands for several hours, and in doing so, he participated fully in what God was doing that day. Not as the central figure, not as the instrument of victory, but as the faithful support that made it possible for the act of faith to continue when it would have otherwise failed. There is one last thing to say about HUR before we close, and it is the quietest thing of all. No one wrote a song about him after the battle. No altar was named for him. The book of Exodus does not pause to describe how he felt about those hours on the hill, what it cost him in the heat, or what it meant to him to watch Israel hold the field while he stood in the background without a sword. The text records simply that he was there, that he held on, and then moves forward. Part of the work that sustains the people of God happens exactly this way. It happens without ceremony, in the background, carried out by people who show up when leaders are struggling and do what is needed without waiting for someone to announce that it was necessary. The work gets done and the text moves on. Because the point was never the worker. The point was the work. And yet, HUR's name is in the Bible. It has been in the Bible for 3,000 years. It is in Exodus and it is in Chronicles, and through it runs a thread that leads to the tabernacle, to the dwelling place of God on earth, to the grandson whose hands would work in gold and silver and acacia wood to build the house where the presence of the Most High would rest among his people. This is what the people of God need to understand about faithfulness in quiet places. It is not invisible to God. What happens on the hill is as present to him as what happens in the valley. The acts of steady service that no one photographs, the prayers that no one hears, the hands that hold things steady when everything else is shaking, none of it disappears. It is held in the memory of the one who sees everything, and in his economy, it is not wasted. So let us end where this story really ends. Not on the hillside, not at the altar Moses built, but here, with you, wherever you are watching this. Every person in this video has a position in that scene. Some of you are in the valley right now. The battle is real and close and exhausting, and you are fighting it with everything you have. You are doing exactly what God placed you to do. And I want you to know that the hill is not empty. Someone up there is holding on for you. Some of you are Moses. You are carrying something heavy, something that requires your hands to stay raised, and your body and your spirit are telling you the weight has become more than you can hold. Your arms are dropping. And part of what Rephidim has to say to you is this: God did not design you to do this alone. The presence of HUR on that hill was not an accident. It was an arrangement. And if you need someone beside you, you are allowed to say so. And some of you are HUR. You already know it. There is a person in your life whose arms are falling. A leader who is exhausted and trying not to show it. A parent at the edge of what they can carry. a friend who has been holding something alone for far too long. You have been wondering whether there is anything you can actually do. You are not Moses. You do not have the staff. The battle is not yours to lead. But you have your hands. You have your steadiness. You have the capacity to close the distance between noticing a need and doing something about it. And that is not a small thing. That is the work HUR did. That is the work God remembers. The book of Ecclesiastes says it plainly. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. HUR did not need a lecture on this principle. He lived it on a hillside in the heat for hours, without recognition, because the person beside him needed someone who would not let go. Ask yourself honestly, is there someone in your life whose arms are dropping right now? Someone who has been trying to hold their posture of faith alone and is running out of strength to do it? And are you willing to be the person who finds the stone, stands alongside, and holds on until the sun goes down? Even when no one in the valley can see you. Because the victory belongs to God. It always has. Yahweh Nisi. The Lord is the banner, not Moses, not Joshua, not Aaron, and not HUR. But he chose to work through all of them, each in their position, each doing what the moment required. And he is still working that way. He still places Joshua in the valley, Moses on the hill, and HUR beside them, steady and faithful, holding on until the battle is over. HUR stood on that hill until the sun went down, not until it became inconvenient, not until someone gave him permission to leave, until the work was finished. May God give us the grace to be that kind of people. If this story spoke to something in you today, I want to ask you 3 things. Leave a comment below and tell us. Have you ever had a HUR in your life? Someone who held you up when you could no longer hold yourself? Or have you been someone else's HUR without fully recognizing it at the time? Share that story. Someone watching this right now needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. There are names in the pages of the Bible that deserve careful and honest attention, and we intend to keep telling them. And share this video with someone who is standing on a hillside right now. Someone whose arms are dropping. Let them know that HUR's story is their story, that God sees the hill, that faithfulness in quiet places is not invisible. The Lord is my banner. Stay in that truth. God bless you, and we will see you in the next video.